Hey everyone, 99% of you watching aren't subscribed. Let's change that. Hit that subscribe button, and at 1,000 subscribers, we'll drop special stories just for you.
The scrap market on the outer ring of Orion Station was a place where broken things came to die. Or, if they were lucky, to be reborn. Most days it smelled like burnt circuits and overheated plasma coils. Vendors shouted over each other. Drones zipped between stalls carrying parts and credits, and somewhere, always, something sparked. It was chaos. It was home. I ran a modest stall wedge between a recycler who never smiled and a cybernetic limb dealer who smiled too much. My sign flickered overhead, repairs, restorations, and probably works again guarantees. Business was steady. Nothing glamorous. Fix a comm unit here. Patch a cracked servo there. People didn't come to me for perfection. They came because I was cheap. That afternoon started like any other, until the crowd parted. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no sudden silence. Just a subtle shift, like people stepping out of the way without realizing why. And then she was there, a little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, standing directly in front of my counter. She didn't look like she belonged. Not because of what she wore, simple clothes, nothing fancy, but because of how she carried herself, straight-backed, still, calm in a place that swallowed calm whole. In her arms, she held a small mechanical doll. At first glance, it looked like junk. The wings were bent at odd angles, one leg hung loose, and one of its glass eyes flickered weakly like it couldn't decide whether to stay alive or give up. But something about it made me pause. "Can you fix her?" she asked. Her voice wasn't timid. It wasn't demanding either. It was certain. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the counter. "Let's see what we've got." She gently placed the doll down, as if it might feel the impact. Up close, the damage was worse than I thought. The outer shell was scratched and dented, but that wasn't the real problem. The seams. They were too precise, too clean. This wasn't standard mass-produced junk. Whoever made this knew what they were doing. I flipped the doll carefully, scanning the joints. "Where'd you get this?" "It's mine," she said. I glanced up at her. No hesitation. No story. Just a fact. "All right," I said slowly. "Well, she's in bad shape." The girl's fingers tightened slightly at her sides, but her expression didn't change. "Can you fix her?" she repeated. I scratched the back of my neck. "Maybe, but not fast. The core's probably damaged, and if that's gone, then—" "Fix her," she said, still calm, still certain. Something about that tone made me stop talking. I sighed and reached for my toolkit. "Okay, but you're waiting. I don't let strangers leave stuff like this behind." "I'll wait." Of course she would. I powered up my workbench, the familiar hum grounding me. Tools floated into position, precision drivers, micro-soldering arms, diagnostic probes. Carefully, I began opening the doll. The first panel came off easily. The second, less so. And then I saw it. I froze. Inside wasn't the usual mess of cheap wiring and generic chips. This was layered, structured, elegant in a way that made my brain itch. Adaptive circuits, self-correcting pathways, and something deeper, something I couldn't immediately identify. "What is this thing?" I muttered. The girl didn't answer. I glanced at her. She was watching me the entire time. Not nervously, not curiously, just watching, like she already knew what I would find. I went back to work. Slower now, more careful. "This isn't standard," I said. "You shouldn't even have something like this out here. If someone sees." "They won't," she said. I almost laughed at that. "This is a scrap market," I said. "Everyone sees everything." But even as I said it, I noticed something strange. No one was looking. Not really. People passed by, close enough to bump into us, but their eyes slid away at the last second. Conversations shifted direction. Movements adjusted, like there was a quiet bubble around us. I didn't like it. I focused on the task. The core was the problem, just like I thought. A compact unit buried deep inside the chest cavity, cracked along one edge. Not completely destroyed, but unstable. "All right," I said, mostly to myself. "We can work with this." I reached for a replacement processor from my parts bin, something close enough to stabilize the system without interfering too much. As I worked, the hours slipped by. The market noise dimmed, shifting from chaotic daytime energy to the lower, heavier rhythm of evening trade. Lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the stalls. Still, the girl didn't move. Not once. You don't get bored, do you? I asked at one point. No, she said. Hungry? No. I shrugged. Suit yourself. Piece by piece, I rebuilt the core, reinforced the cracked sections, bridged damaged circuits, recalibrated the neural pathways as best as I could without fully understanding them. It felt like walking through a maze in the dark, but somehow it worked. Finally, I sealed the casing and set the doll upright on the counter. All right, I said, wiping my hands on a rag. Moment of truth. The girl stepped closer. For the first time, there was something different in her posture. Not fear, but anticipation. I flipped the activation switch. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a flicker. The damaged eye sparked once, twice, and then both eyes lit up, glowing a soft, steady blue. The doll's head tilted slightly, as if waking from a long sleep. Its wings trembled, then slowly unfolded, reshaping themselves with a series of tiny, precise clicks. It lifted one arm, moved it, alive. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Well, I'll be... The girl reached out and picked it up gently, cradling it against her chest. And then, she smiled. It was small, brief, but it changed everything. Thank you, she said. I nodded, still staring at the doll. Yeah, no problem. That'll be... She placed something on the counter. A coin, metallic, smooth, cold-looking even under the flickering lights. I frowned. We don't take. I stopped because I recognized it, not from experience, from stories, from things you hear whispered in places like this when people think no one important is listening. My throat went dry. This isn't... I started, but when I looked up, she was already walking away. The crowd shifted again, parting just enough for her to pass through, and for a moment, the entire market felt like it was holding its breath. I looked back down at the coin in my hand, and suddenly, fixing a broken toy didn't feel like such a simple job anymore. I didn't close my stall right away. I should have. Every instinct I had, every lesson learned from years of surviving on the edge of civilized space, told me to pack up, disappear, and pretend none of this ever happened. Instead, I stood there staring at the coin. It rested in my palm, heavier than it should have been. Not physically, no, it was light, but there was something else to it, a kind of presence, like holding it meant something, even if I didn't fully understand what. The market noise slowly crept back and around me, as if someone had unpaused reality. A vendor shouted about discounted plasma filters. A pair of scavengers argued over a crate of scrap. Somewhere nearby, metal clanged against metal in a rhythm I'd heard 1,000 times. Everything was normal again, except it wasn't. I turned the coin over between my fingers. No numbers, no trade markings, no merchant seal, just a symbol. Sharp, elegant, impossible. I knew that symbol. Everyone did, at least everyone who paid attention to the kind of stories that got people killed. The crest of the Varelian Dominion. I swallowed. That's not funny, I muttered to myself. I reached under the counter and pulled out my scanner, a battered but reliable device I used to check parts for hidden faults or stolen tech signatures. My hands were steady. That was the strange part. Inside, something was definitely not steady. I placed the coin on the scanner pad and activated it. A soft blue light swept over the surface. Processing, analyzing. The screen flickered, then locked. For a second, nothing happened. Then the results appeared. Authentication verified. Clearance level royal access. Encryption unbreakable. I stared at the display. No, I said quietly. No. I ran the scan again. Same result. I adjusted the sensitivity. Ran a deeper analysis. Same result. If anything, the confirmation only got worse. Additional layers of encryption unfolded. patterns I didn't recognize, signatures I couldn't even begin to trace. This wasn't just real. It was important, dangerously important. I snapped the scanner off and looked around. No one was watching me. At least, not obviously. But suddenly, every shadow felt a little too deep. Every passerby a little too deliberate. I grabbed the coin and shoved it into my pocket. All right, I muttered, that's enough for today. I started shutting everything down faster than usual, powering off tools, locking storage compartments, covering sensitive equipment. My hands moved automatically, muscle memory taking over while my mind raced ahead. That girl, who was she? And more importantly, why me? I finished packing up and sealed the stall. The flickering sign above me dimmed to black, leaving the narrow alley in a dull, artificial twilight. The walk back to my quarters wasn't long. It never had been, but that night it felt different. Every step echoed louder than it should have. Every turn of the corridor felt like it might reveal someone waiting. I kept my head down, didn't run. Running attracts attention, but I didn't slow down either. When I finally reached my door, I keyed in the lock code faster than usual and slipped inside, sealing it behind me with a sharp hiss. Silence. Real silence. No market noise. No distant chatter. Just a low hum of station systems vibrating through the walls. I leaned back against the door and exhaled. Okay, I said to the empty room. Think. I pulled the coin out again and placed it on my small work table. Under proper lighting, it looked even more unreal. The surface wasn't scratched, not even slightly. It reflected light in a way that didn't quite make sense, like it was absorbing and bending it at the same time. I reached for my scanner again. One more time, just to be sure. The result didn't change. It wouldn't change, because this was a mistake. This wasn't a counterfeit. This was something I was never supposed to have. I sank into the chair across from the table, staring at it. The Varelian Dominion didn't hand out royal insignias, not as payment, not as favors, not for fixing toys, which meant one of two things. Either I had just done something incredibly important without realizing it, or I had just made a mistake that was going to get me killed. A soft sound broke the silence. I froze. A knock. 3 sharp taps. Precise. Measured. Not loud, but not hesitant either. My heart started pounding. Slowly I stood. Yeah. I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No response. Just the quiet hum of the station. Another 3 taps. Exactly the same as before. Not random. Not impatient. Intentional. I moved toward the door, each step heavier than the last. Every bad scenario I could imagine flashed through my mind. Debt collectors. Station security. Something worse. I reached the control panel and hesitated. Then, against my better judgment, I opened it. The door slid aside with a soft mechanical whisper. 2 figures stood in the corridor. Tall, still, encased in dark, seamless armor that reflected the dim hallway lights like polished obsidian. No insignias, no visible weapons, but they didn't need either. Everything about them screamed control, authority, power. I didn't recognize the armor design, which meant it wasn't something I was supposed to recognize. I started. Can I help you? One of them tilted their head slightly, then spoke. Come with us. That was it. No explanation. No introduction. No threat. And somehow that made it worse. I forced a weak laugh. Yeah, I'm going to need a bit more than that. The second figure stepped forward, not aggressively, just enough to close the distance by half a step. Now, they said, one word. Flat. Final. I glanced behind me, at the table, at the coin still sitting there in plain sight. So they knew. Of course they knew. I looked back at them. Weighed my options. There weren't any. I exhaled slowly. Let me grab my jacket, I said. They didn't respond. Didn't move. Didn't need to. I stepped back inside, grabbed the nearest thing that looked like a jacket, and, after a brief hesitation, picked up the coin. If I was going somewhere I couldn't control, I wasn't leaving the only leverage I had behind. When I returned to the doorway, they were exactly where they had been, waiting. I stepped out into the corridor. The door slid shut behind me. Sealed. Final. All right, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Lead the way. They turned in perfect sync, and without another word, I followed them into whatever I just got myself into. They didn't restrain me. No cuffs, no weapons drawn, no force. That should have been comforting. It wasn't, because it meant they didn't think I had a choice. We moved through parts of Orion Station I'd never seen before, or maybe parts I'd never noticed. Corridors peeled away from the familiar paths. Lighting grew dimmer, cleaner, quieter. The noise of the market faded behind us until it felt like a distant memory. No people, no drones, no cameras that I could see. That last part bothered me the most. At the end of a long, curved passageway, a docking chamber opened before us, and inside it, a ship. It didn't look like anything I recognized. No visible seams, no external markings, no bulky engines or exposed weaponry. Its surface was smooth, almost organic, absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. It wasn't built to impress. It was built to exist, as if it didn't need permission from physics to do so. We're getting on that? I asked. No answer. Of course. The two figures continued forward, and I followed. The moment I stepped inside, the temperature shifted. Cooler, controlled. The air felt cleaner than it should have been. The interior was just as unsettling as the exterior. No clutter, no wasted space. Everything had purpose, even if I couldn't understand what that purpose was. Where are we going? I tried again. Silence. Right, of course. We moved deeper into the ship. The doors didn't open. They separated, dissolving into the walls as we approached and reforming seamlessly behind us. No sound, no delay, no visible mechanism. I didn't like that either. Eventually, we reached a larger chamber, circular, dimly lit by a soft violet glow that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The guard stopped. "This is where you dramatically leave me alone, isn't it?" I said. They didn't react. Then, in perfect sync, they turned and walked away. The door behind me sealed. I was alone, or at least, I thought I was. I turned slowly, taking in the room. It was vast, but not empty. The space was carefully shaped, almost like it had been designed to guide your attention toward one place. The far end, there, elevated slightly above the rest of the floor, was a structure that resembled a throne. Not ornate, not excessive, but unmistakably a seat of authority. And on it, someone sat, still, watching. I hadn't noticed her at first. That was the unsettling part. She didn't announce herself. She didn't need to. You repaired it. The voice filled the room, without echoing. Clear, controlled, heavy. I froze. "Yeah," I said after a moment, my voice sounding smaller than I liked. "I did." Silence followed. Not empty silence. Evaluating silence. I felt it like something was being measured, weighed, decided. You did not alter its core directives. It wasn't a question. "No," I said. "I didn't know what they were. I just fixed what was broken." A pause. Then she moved. Slowly, she stood from the throne, and as she stepped forward, the light shifted just enough to reveal her. Sharp features, composed expression, eyes that didn't just look at you, but through you. There was no doubt, no hesitation. This was her, the queen of the Varelian Dominion. The name alone carried weight across entire systems. Stories of her decisions, cold, precise, absolute, were told in whispers, even in places far beyond her reach. And now she was standing in front of me, because I fixed a toy. "The construct you repaired," she said as she descended the steps, "was not a toy." I figured that out. I muttered. Her gaze flickered, just slightly, not annoyance, not approval, just acknowledgement. "It is a unique learning construct," she continued. "Adaptive, self-evolving. There is only one like it." I swallowed. "Then I got lucky," I said. "You did not," she replied. That landed harder than expected. She reached the bottom of the steps and stopped a few paces away from me. Not close enough to invade my space, but close enough that I couldn't ignore her presence. "You navigated its architecture without understanding it. she said. You repaired damage without compromising function. I shrugged weakly. That's kind of what I do. Yes, she said. Just that. Yes. And somehow, that felt like more than agreement. My daughter chose you. That word stuck. Daughter. The girl, I said, in the market. Yes. I let out a slow breath. She didn't say anything about this. She would not, the queen said. She does not trust easily. I thought back to the way the girl had watched me. The silence, the certainty. Why me? I asked. It was the question that had been sitting in my chest since the moment I saw the coin. The queen studied me. Not my face. Not my posture. Me. The construct is important to her, she said. She has refused assistance from others. Others with better equipment, I'm guessing. Yes. Safer environments. Yes. And she still came to the scrap market. Yes. I let out a short breath. That doesn't make sense. It does, the queen said calmly. To her. That didn't help, but it told me something. This wasn't random. None of this was random. You repaired more than a machine, she continued. You restored something she values. I shifted my weight. I didn't know that at the time. That is why it matters. I frowned slightly. Because I didn't know? Yes. I didn't respond. Because I didn't have a response. The room felt quiet again. But this time it felt different. Less like I was being judged. More like something had already been decided. Finally, I exhaled. I just did my job, I said. The queen's expression changed. Barely. A fraction of a shift. But it was there. Not quite a smile, but something close. And for a brief, unsettling moment, the most feared woman in the galaxy looked almost pleased. The silence stretched between us, but it no longer felt like a test, more like a conclusion. The queen turned slightly, pacing a slow, measured step across the chamber. Every movement was deliberate, nothing wasted, nothing accidental. Even the way her cloak shifted seemed controlled. You expect payment, she said at last. It wasn't accusatory, just factual. I hesitated. I mean, normally, yeah, I admit it. That's kind of how this works. Her gaze returned to me. The coin. I reached into my pocket and pulled it out, holding it between my fingers. This thing. Yes. You said it was a test. It was. I turned it over again, studying it under the violet light. Most people use smaller tests. I muttered. That would not have interested my daughter. That actually made sense. I let out a breath and slipped the coin back into my pocket. So what happens now? You take it back? Wipe my memory? Quietly remove me from existence? I meant it as a joke. Mostly. The queen didn't smile. No. Just that. No elaboration. I wasn't sure if that was reassuring or not. That was not payment, she continued. It was access. Access to what? To me? I blinked. Right, I said. Of course it was. Because apparently I had accidentally unlocked an audience with the most feared ruler in the galaxy. That seemed normal. She studied me again, but this time there was something different in her eyes. Not evaluation. Consideration. And now, she said, you are here. I crossed my arms loosely, more to give myself something to do than out of confidence. Yeah, can't say it was on my schedule. No, she agreed. It would not be. A faint pause. Then, you have a choice. The words settled heavily in the air. I didn't like the sound of that. Those are usually dangerous. I said, they are, she replied. At least she was honest. She stepped slightly closer. Not enough to threaten, but enough that I couldn't ignore the shift. You may return to your life, she said. You will not be followed. You will not be harmed. The coin will remain with you. I frowned. Why? It identifies you as someone under my protection. I blinked. I'm sorry, what? Should you encounter those who recognize it, she continued, they will understand that interfering with you carries consequences. I stared at her. You're telling me, I said slowly, that I will walk out of here with that coin, and suddenly people who would normally rob, cheat, or kill me won't? Yes. That's, I shook my head. That's not a small thing. No, she said. It is not. I looked away for a moment, letting that sink in. A scrap mechanic from the edge of Orion Station, suddenly untouchable. Or at least less touchable. It didn't feel real. And the other option? I asked. I already knew it wouldn't be simple. You come with us, she said. Of course. To do what? I asked. Her answer came without hesitation. To build. She gestured faintly, and the chamber seemed to respond. Subtle shifts in light, revealing faint outlines of structures beyond the walls. Not physical, but projected. Ships, systems, designs. Things far beyond anything I'd ever worked on. To repair, she continued. To create. To work on systems that shape more than a single market stall. I felt something tighten in my chest. Opportunity. Danger. Probably both. You're offering me a job. I said. I am offering you purpose, she corrected. That hit harder than I expected. I glanced down at my hands, scarred, stained from years of patching together other people's discarded problems. I already have a purpose, I said, though it sounded weaker than I intended. Yes, she said. You maintain what others abandon. I winced slightly, not because it was insulting, because it was accurate. She took another slow step, circling just enough to shift the angle between us. With us, she said, you would create what others depend on. I let out a quiet breath. Yeah, I said, and what's the cost? Her answer was immediate. You would not be free in the way you are now. There it was, the part that mattered. No going back? I asked. You may leave, she said, but not unchanged. That wasn't comforting. I rubbed the back of my neck, pacing a small step to the side. The room felt larger now, like it was giving me space to think, or trapping me in it. I thought about my stall, the flickering sign, the endless cycle of broken things and temporary fixes. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't important, but it was mine. Then I thought about the girl, the way she had held that doll, like it mattered more than anything, the way she had trusted me, not with words, but with certainty. I looked back at the queen. If I say yes, I said slowly, what happens next? You begin, she said. That's not very detailed. It does not need to be. Of course it didn't. I exhaled through my nose. Would I see her again? I asked. That was the real question. The only one that actually mattered. For the first time, the queen smiled. Not fully, not warmly, but undeniably. Yes. That settled it. I closed my eyes for a brief second, letting the weight of the decision press down. Then I opened them again. All right, I said. Yeah. A pause. Then more firmly, I'll come. The words felt strange the moment they left my mouth. Too big, too final. The room didn't react. No alarms. No dramatic shift. Just silence. Then the queen turned, her cloak trailing behind her as she began walking toward the far side of the chamber. Then you will follow, she said. Not a command. Not quite an invitation. Something in between. I hesitated for half a second. Then I stepped forward. One step, then another, each one pulling me further away from the life I understood and deeper into something I didn't. As I reached her side, the chamber began to open, walls dissolving into light, revealing corridors that hadn't been there before. Or maybe they had, and I just hadn't been allowed to see them. Just so we're clear, I said, trying to lighten the moment. This isn't going to end with me fixing more toys, is it? She didn't slow. No. I nodded. Good, I said, because I have a feeling your version of toys is a lot more complicated. A faint pause in her stride. Then, you have no idea. And as I followed her into the unknown, one thought settled firmly in my mind. I hadn't just fixed a broken toy. I had stepped into something far bigger than I was ready for. And somehow, that was exactly why I couldn't walk away.